Contessa Clicherella Rehashiman III ran through the hallways of her family's mansion, feeling the heat of fire burning at her heels. "Help me! Help me!" Little did she know the household was deep in a drugged sleep, never to wake again. She slammed her fists on the mansion's front doors, but they were barred from the outside. The fire slowly crept through the halls, converging. Clicherella screamed. "Ah!" She sat up in bed, sweating. It had all been a dream. Well, a memory, really. And that is why you need to learn how to write good transitions, so that this awful cliche doesn't happen to you. Welcome to CC Writes. My name is CC Lepke, and today I'm sharing 7 scene transitions and how to write them. A common struggle among many writers concerns the scenes we write and how to seamlessly move between them. A poorly written scene transition can be jarring for readers at best. At worst, it can alienate your audience from your story and cause them to stop reading entirely. I don't want that for you. I want you to be able to approach any scene from any story you're writing with a tool belt packed with useful things you can use to smooth the edges of your story. Which is why today I'm not only giving you a starter kit of tools you can use to write better transitions, but I'm also showing you how to use those tools effectively. If you struggle with shaky transitions that throw your prose out of sorts, or you just want a bit of a refresher for your already well-polished skills, then you've come to the right place. I am here for you. Let's start with a quick overview of the tools I'm sharing, and then we'll get into the dirty details of how to use them effectively. I've actually named all of these transitions after various joints used in woodworking. We have the butt joint, the dotto, the rabbet, the dovetail, the lap joint, the mortise and tenon, and the tongue and groove. Each of these transitions has a specific purpose and times when they work best. I'm going to show you how to use them so that you'll know when best to use them, and so that your transitions will not only be smooth, but also emotionally effective. The butt joint. There is a juncture in your story where you simply place the 2 scenes next to each other without a specific transition. This works well at the end of a chapter or after a startling revelation. It's a cliffhanger transition, and the use of it either means that time has passed or the main character is panicking or dissociating. It acts as kind of a frozen moment in time and is best used to spur your readers to keep turning the page and reading on so that their anxiety can be relieved. Let's say I have one scene where the manager of the office takes a phone call with the business owner who says he has to fire half of his team. In another scene, I have the same manager leaning against the doorframe as he calls employees into his office one by one. If I were to take these 2 scenes and use the butt joint, then I would end the first scene after the manager hangs up the phone call and takes a moment to reflect. I would leave blank space between that paragraph and the next one, or start a completely new chapter. Then I would start the next scene, preferably from the perspective of an employee at the back of the room who hasn't been called yet. Or at the very least, I would describe it as if looking at the scene from a distance to convey the manager's dissociation. The dotto. The dotto transition happens when you have a scene that partially intersects another scene. It's characterized by interweaving the 2 scenes together as if they were happening at the same time. In movie-making terms, this is called a cut-to moment, where past events or events that are happening simultaneously are woven throughout a scene as a way to either punch up humor, increase tension, or create an emotional parallel between 2 scenes. Using the same 2 office scenes that I described earlier, I would start with the manager answering the phone and acknowledging who he speaks to before receiving the message of what he needs to do. I would cut to him calling the first person into his office, then cut back to him arguing with the business owner as he tries to defend his employees. I would cut back to the first person leaving the office crying and the manager calling someone else into the office, so on and so forth, with various reactions from the employees until the scenes are both complete. The rabbet. When your scenes partially intersect as if one is simply flowing into the other, you have a rabbet transition. And no, I did not spell that wrong. A rabbit transition is typically when the action between two separate scenes is uninterrupted. The story carries on as if there wasn't a break, even though the setting and even the characters interacting in the scene may be different. This is great for action or fast-paced dialogue. Using the rabbit transition will speed up the pace of your story. With the same office scenes, after the office manager finishes his phone call and completes his emotional response to the news, he gets up and walks to the office door and begins calling people into his office. There's not really a break between the two events happening, they just are part of the same event that are occurring in the story. The dovetail. Sometimes things fit together like a piece of a puzzle. When the end of one scene has a physical, emotional, or symbolic parallel or counterpoint in the following scene, you have a dovetail transition. When using the dovetail, you focus on the object, word, phrase, or emotion that connects the two scenes, and then start your next scene focused on that same thing. To dovetail the office scenes, I might focus on the manager hanging up his phone and then counterpoint that with one of his employees picking up the phone as they're working, only to be cut short by the manager calling his or her name to come into the office. The lap joint. Sometimes, right in the middle of a scene, the story cuts away to a different scene and then goes back to complete the original scene. This is a lap joint transition. It's great when used with flashbacks that convey backstory or intent. It can also be used for comedic purposes, such as clearly conveying the idea that the narrator or a character is lying about what's happening in the original scene. For the lap joint, I would actually reverse the scene order so that the manager calls people into his office while the employees wonder what's going on. The first employee would leave crying and the manager calls someone else into the office as everyone murmurs. I would cut back to the manager getting the phone call and his emotional response to the news. Then I would return to the office workers as the last person is being called in. The mortise and tenon. The mortise and tenon transition happens when two scenes are connected together by a minor event or action. The minor event can even be a small scene simply meant to clarify the action of what happens between the two scenes. Sometimes the connecting event can be as simple as giving an overview of the most notable events that happen between scenes in order to convey the passage of a large amount of time. Sometimes the event can be hyper-focused to show immediate, hurried action between scenes as a character rushes to complete a task. Whatever it is, the minor event shouldn't take up much time. With the same two office scenes, I would end the first scene after the manager's emotional response to the news. Interject a receptionist who's asked over the intercom to bring employee files to the manager. After she hands the files to the manager, he sits down to stare at the packet he's given. Then I would start the scene with him calling the first employee into his office. The tongue and groove. And finally, we have the tongue and groove transition, where a minor action or event at the end of one scene leads the story into the next. Unlike the mortise and tenon transition, where the minor event is separate from each of the individual scenes, the tongue and groove minor event acts as part of the first scene. It's a great way to create a sense of urgency followed by an emotional pause. It can just as easily be a way to cut out boring intermediate action between scenes and jump straight into the meaty bits of your story without the transition feeling awkward or jarring, or like it's taking way too long. Using the office scenes, it's similar to how I arranged the mortise and tenon transition. I would involve a receptionist, but this time, instead of ending the scene after the manager responds to the news, I would have him press a button on his intercom to speak to the receptionist, take the folders and stare silently at them for a while, and call his first employee into the room. The way you use these transitions is strongly dependent on the feeling you want to convey in your story. To get a strong understanding of what feeling is conveyed, it helps if you practice writing scene transitions much the same way I did here. Come up with a concept for two connected scenes. Try to keep it broad and not too specific about what's meant to happen. And then work out how you would connect the scenes together using these 7 transition types. After you complete each one, try to grasp how each transition makes you feel about the story or the events that take place. When you're writing your story, you want to choose your transitions with intention. Pick the one that typically conveys the best emotion, supports the symbols and themes of your scenes, or encourages your audience to keep reading. And remember that practice makes better than you were yesterday. Do you have any favorite types of scene transitions that I didn't mention here? Leave a comment about it below. If you liked learning about my 7 types of scene transitions and want to see more from me about how to write, check out the video on top where I talk about how to write conflict. Otherwise, click on the bottom video to see what YouTube recommends. As always, thank you so much for joining me today on CC Writes. I hope you enjoyed our time together, and I will see you later.